B. Viruses in the information age.
Hi, thank you. Well, this presentation is called Viruses in the Information Age. I should make a couple of clarifications first, exactly what I'm talking about when I say viruses. In this case, I'm talking about self-replicating programs which do damage in one of several ways. Either they're an espionage-type virus that may mail personal information, they may do some sort of damage, or they may not be intentionally damaging, but just by the fact they use your system resources, we consider them problems of some sort. I'm not talking about so-called good viruses or research into autonomous agents or other sorts of self-replicating programs, talking specifically about the things that people are generally referring to when they say computer virus. So in case anybody's going to say, but what about good viruses? Does this apply to... We're not talking about those now. We're talking about viruses, the stuff that antivirus software is supposed to detect. So, what this presentation will cover. The first thing I'm going to talk about, and this wasn't an original thing I planned to talk about, but I got about 30 telephone calls from people saying, aren't you the person that profiles virus writers? Aren't you like the profiler? And so I thought that probably I should talk a little bit about what profiling actually is. I think someone else is talking about it later this week as well, so I'll just kind of briefly touch on that. We'll talk about the computer virus underground, where it is, how it's developed, what goes on there, who's there. And we'll talk about the future, what the trends are that virus writers seem to be heading forward toward, or what they're doing now, and about some possible solutions related to viruses in the information age. So profiles in general, as I promised. First of all, I think you need to have a bit of a more realistic picture than some people seem to have when they ring me up. They've seen Silence of the Lambs here. The sheep was as close as I could get. But actually, profiling isn't anything at all like what you see on Millennium or Profiler. There are no psychic flashbacks. There are no big extra insights where you have special photography and you think, oh, I can feel the virus writer. It's not like that. That's not what profiling is about. It's really... this isn't my computer, so if I go the wrong direction, bear with me. It's really just a tool that can aid in a process of investigation. Now, I don't work with law enforcement. I don't do investigations. I'm not involved in tracking hackers or tracking virus writers, despite some people would like me to be. But profiling is a tool that could aid in that sort of activity. It can certainly aid in a questioning process when you know maybe something about the individual, you know what type of questions might be likely to work better or to elicit responses that could be in your corporate environment or if you're a law enforcement person. And could provide for expert witness, which I'm not and hopefully will never be. And profiling is basically divided into two sorts of methodology, inductive and deductive. And so we'll talk about those just a little bit, but first we'll look at the characteristics when people do profiles that they're looking to find out. Looking to find out things like the race, the gender, the age, whether the person's married, the degree of their maturity, whether or not they're likely to strike again. Obviously, there are a lot of traits here which many of you would have in common, like you would all mostly be males between a certain age. You're generally employed in security industry. So I sort of question whether or not profiling can be so useful. There may be some females, not too many. Just a minute ago, I said there were two types of profiling. The inductive method of profiling assumes that there are certain commonly shared characteristics that can be generalized back to unknown offenders or actors, if we're talking about virus writers, because after all, writing a computer virus, at least in America, isn't a crime. What you do in the privacy of your own home generally isn't criminalized. And this sort of profiling also assumes that offenders are culturally similar, they have the same sort of environmental conditions, and they have the same general sort of motives. In other words, in inductive profiling, if we were talking about virus writers, I'd say, oh, I talked to 100 virus writers last year. They were all between 16 and 23. They were all guys. They all wore black. So therefore, if I'm going to look for a virus writer, oh, you write viruses? You must be between 16 and 23 and be a male and wear black. Needless to say, this sort of profiling has a little bit of a problem. We'll talk about the good aspects first and then the problems. First of all, it's like a study of something that's known, so it's really easy to do. Anybody can go out there and do this kind of thing. It doesn't take a whole lot of experience. There's a lot of public information available about criminals in general, virus writers, and we're talking about. It's easy to do, but this data is gathered from a set of known offenders, and it avoids doing anything with the smart people who avoid being detected. So I really don't have a really super great opinion about this sort of particular profiling. In the case of virus writers per se, oftentimes people make a generalization that the profile of the virus writer is just like that of the hacker. So if we know why people hack, we'll know why they write viruses. Two totally different data sets, different motivations, different justifications. So don't make the mistake of lumping these together. In deductive profiling, these sorts of profiles are created from a single incident. You consider everything that happened during the incident. You make use of looking at the actual crime scene, dealing with the actual victim of that specific crime or act, and looking at signature behaviors. Now, signature behaviors are things that people do when they commit crimes that don't actually have a connection with the crime that's being committed. Let's say I made a virus, and in every virus I wrote "death to the weasel." That would be, a signature thing, a weird thing that I did that was specific to me. Now, people can mirror that. That's where in regular crime, you see copycat crimes. People use signatures. So you have to be really kind of careful with this kind of stuff. In other words, this sort of profiling looks at specific cases. And this sort of profiling assumes that there's always a motivation for each act and that every situation is unique. Now, the strengths of, the strengths of this kind of profiling are that because you're looking at specific cases, you can deal with the people or the corporation that's been victimized. It allows for changes in the operator, so if you've got somebody who started writing viruses young, they're continuing over a long period of time, it allows for those changes, and you can look at signature behaviors. Now, these are the three downsides. It isn't a quick fix to do this sort of thing. It can be really exhausting because you spend hours and hours and hours dealing with the actual people and emotions that are involved, and requires a really wide skill set. You just can't go out there and say, oh, I'm going to do a profile on virus writers, or I'm going to look at this crime, and then if you don't really know, if you can't disassemble the virus and see what's really in there, like, for instance, the order that somebody pops things on and off the stack. There are people, I can look at certain programs and say, oh, he's popping these things in this certain order. He's the only guy I know that does this way every single time. If you can't disassemble the virus, you're not going to be able to know that. You're not going to be able to see what the technical aspect, the forensic technical aspect of that virus is. If you haven't worked with people, you're going to have maybe not the greatest luck interviewing the corporation, or in this case, the victim. So it takes a really wide skill set. You can't just be an antivirus expert and do it, or somebody who studied psychology and do it, or somebody who studied criminology and do it. You have to have a multidisciplinary approach. Some people would say, you can lump all these groups of people working together and maybe do this. And generally, it's one person who has all of these skills that kind of does this sort of profiling. Now, stop right there. And let me find myself. We're going to move into the virus writing underground, and then we're going to go back into how profiling may be applied, if it can be applied at all in the case of virus writers. But first we're going to go take a little bit of a look through the virus underground and how things have developed there. In the beginning, which would be about, we're talking virus underground, not viruses per se, which go back a little earlier, as some people here could attest. In 1989, there was this bulletin board in Bulgaria. It was called the Virus Exchange Bulletin Board. It was run by a fellow named Todor Todorov. He ran this bulletin board for a number of years. I was fortunate in that he gave me an exact copy of the bulletin board when it closed down, so I was able to look through all the history and logs of everything that ever happened there. There were a number of users from around the world, people who were identifiable later on who said they had never even called these places, would never be cut dead on a virus bulletin board. There they were. You pretty much could tell it really was the people because they gave information that nobody but them would really have. But this bulletin board primarily worked within Bulgaria. It was not easy to get a telephone line. It was a dial-up system. You had to go on the telephone. So you had to dial 011, 359, 220, 419, whatever the rest of it was. And it was difficult. In America, I guess other countries outside Bulgaria, it was just hard to get in there, so not a lot of people were using it, but some people were. It sort of grew into the FidoNet bulletin board, virus bulletin board group of systems, which were bulletin boards, again, using the FidoNet infrastructure located around America, some in Canada, then some later in Australia. Individual bulletin boards where people could call up and decide that they were going to, give a virus and get one in return. And several of these sprouted out. We had Arrested Development in the UK. In America, a little bit later, we had Black Axis, I think it was called, which also masqueraded as a virus research bulletin board. So if you were a legitimate security person out there looking for information about viruses, you dial into what you think is a legitimate site, and it looks like one because there are two different sides to the BBS, and you're actually in the Black Axis, kind of similar to some things that go on even today. In 1992 to 1993, these networks grew into a roughly formed group of networks. The most well-known was something called NukeNet, and with the appropriately capitalized and small letters, I think big N, little u, big K, big E. Somebody here might know if that's right. But this network of bulletin boards began to develop throughout the world, and it was very popular for a while. It kind of faded away. And then we had, when the virus writers became aware of the internet, and this interestingly enough happened after the hacking community. If you look at 1992, what was happening in the hacking world, when people were using FTP sites to distribute certain sort of programs, people already knew about network connectivity and network awareness. Virus writers in general weren't at that level. I remember talking the first time to one of them who was learning about the internet, and I explained that you could get onto something called IRC, and you could actually use FTP, and there are all these things maybe would be more interesting than just, exploring what they're doing, start doing some real computing out there. And so FTP sites soon they were using to distribute the viruses. Several years after hackers were already doing this stuff, so two very distinct communities. And I think it was when the internet became really widespread throughout the world and different countries had the access to the technologies, we started seeing a global influx of people writing viruses from these different countries using FTP sites and such. And now, of course, we have, from about 1996, virus exchange websites where you can just go out on the World Wide Web if you want some viruses, and you can go get them. Anybody basically can go get them. Something important to remember if you're a corporate IS person is that the things you find on the virus exchange sites, first of all, are not always viruses. They may be corrupted files or things that when you may try to do a test of software with things you get from a virus exchange board, and when the product fails to detect something, you'll say, that's a terrible product, I shouldn't buy it, it failed to detect the virus in this file. You have to understand that unless you replicate the samples and you know what you're doing, that file you get may not even be infected. Oftentimes we find things on these sites that aren't really viruses, or they're corrupted replications, so there's some dangers in using these sites. And also, many of the viruses that you find there aren't really a threat. And we consider the major threats to be the things that are out there spreading in the wild, or that seem to have the characteristics of a virus that actually can spread in the wild. That is, it doesn't just operate on DOS 3.3. If you have something like that, it's probably not going to spread too well in the wild because not too many people are using DOS 3.3, except I am still using it when I use DOS, which isn't that often. So what goes on these sites? First of all, how many of you have been to one or another virus exchange bulletin board or site where people are carrying on and doing so? Raise your hands higher. Can't see those. Okay. And how many of you didn't raise your hands but are doing it? Okay. All right. What goes on there is basically what goes on, in the bar after hours. You have people doing banter, talking back and forth, talking about the latest Danzig CD or, what they saw at the movies or whatever. So you have people talking. It's not necessarily all about viruses. It could be about lots of things. Generally, it isn't. It hasn't in the past been information security, although there's a little bit more of that now as the virus writing and hacking community are sort of merging, although the merge is more often I don't know if it will hurt this if I hit my hands, a big bump than a kind of a merge. The two communities have different skill sets, so there's some merging, but not a lot, and there's a lot of, hey, I'm better than you, oh, I own your box, this kind of stuff going on. There's an exchange of ideas, most of which aren't very new or original, but which they seem to think are very new and original. There is an exchange and distribution of viruses, which is what many of the corporate IS people may do when they go to the sites, get viruses, and use them for testing on your in-house networks of your organization. They may decide that they would like to play with that virus just a little bit, and if they don't really know how, you could end up getting a variant of the virus that your software won't detect. That would be a bad thing. But people do it all the time. I get lots of calls from corporate security people who say, I don't really want to tell my boss this, but I got this virus off wherever, and I just played around with it a little bit to see if the software could catch it if I changed it, and it can't. But now it's all throughout the network. Can you help me? So then, that's why we got to keep adding these signatures, because, people keep messing with this stuff. They shouldn't be. I didn't really know what word to use here, so I used paraphernalia. There's various kinds of virus paraphernalia that can be utilities, construction kits to write viruses, generally not very interesting viruses, disassemblers, many of which are copyrighted, some which are not. I like IDA. Antivirus software of various types, although I would caution you not to get your antivirus software from a virus exchange site. People have done that and found themselves in a little bit of trouble as the software opened and infected every file that they accessed in the past, in the day of the Thunderbite glory. And you'll find different magazines with different sorts of source code, which corporate IS people can go out and compile and create brand new viruses depending on which assembly program they're using. Or macro viruses they can get and edit and change around. Now, this has gotten a lot of attention lately, viruses on the internet and magazines. This isn't a new thing. If anybody's out there and you're writing an article about, oh boy, now there are viruses and magazines on the internet, there have been viruses and magazines on the internet for a long time, so it's not really a new thing. So now we know what's there, kind of what's going on. So why are people there? We're going to look first at some justifications people use. And you can kind of read down the list, and I'll talk about each of them. First reason people often give me for writing viruses or being on the site where they're with other people who write viruses. Is this mine? Excuse me. They say that they're doing research. Now, I work for IBM Research, and I do research every day. We don't just play Doom all day. And there are certain guidelines when you do research. You have to have controls. You have to have informed consent of your subjects. You generally have to have some sort of hypothesis and methodology, which you're willing to publish and share results with your colleagues. And when I hear people tell me that they're doing research by writing viruses and making them available for everybody, it seems that they haven't really looked in great depth at what constitutes a serious or at least a responsible research. Now, I can't deny that viruses are interesting. I got my first virus in the early 1990s. I thought it was just way cool. I was very interested in how this thing worked, and that's how I got involved in this. So viruses are interesting, but just to do experimentation in a way that's uncontrolled isn't really research. It's self-indulgence. And that's not saying that somebody can't be self-indulgent. I guess they can be if they want, but people should be a little responsible, personally, I think. People say they are doing writing viruses as an exercise in rights or freedom. It's my right as an American to write whatever I want, or if they're not an American, it's my right to protest against the horrible American government by writing viruses if ever I want. Depending, there's all sorts of rights, I guess, depending where you are. It's my freedom to do X, Y, Z, and to that I usually just say, it's my freedom to go pull the feathers off a bird too, but, nobody's going to say, oh, that's illegal, and as long as it's not a protected bird. It doesn't make it a right or necessarily cool thing to do. There's the old information wants to be free. I guess you guys are probably all familiar with that. The only thing is that not all information wants to be free, and a virus that sends your private information to somebody else isn't sending information that I don't think it wants to be free. I mean, I think it probably wants to stay wherever you've put it. Some people say viruses have no effect. It's all just a big hype or a myth dreamed up by the antivirus industry. And I will admit there has been hype, and a lot of hype. I don't make antivirus software, so I don't have a product that has been hyping. I used to help develop IBM antivirus. Before that, I worked in development of FPROT. Before that, I worked a little while for Dr. Solomon Software. And I have observed through the years, on occasion, what I consider to be unnecessary hype from some people who market, not necessarily develop, but who market antivirus software. So, you know, there is some hype, but you can't really say there's never been an effect. We have documented incidents of viruses, for instance, causing corruption in patient records in hospitals. We have documented cases of viruses that got loose in critical systems. Now, you can say, well, the critical systems people shouldn't have access to get viruses there. But these things have happened. These things are documented. And you can't deny that certainly this last Melissa spreading throughout the internet had an effect on a lot of companies. I think in the very early days, if somebody said, you know, I just don't think if I write this virus and let it loose, it's going to have that much of an effect. I can understand somebody believing that 10, 15 years ago when there wasn't all this connectivity. But the internet is designed to give maximum connectivity to maximum number of people. And so anybody who releases a network-aware virus, I really don't understand how they could say, oh, I didn't know it would spread. I mean, maybe they could, but then I wonder how they could have written the virus if they didn't understand that the internet is connected, interconnected. I often hear that, you know, people are justified in writing viruses because all of us people who work in AV were bad, and we think we stereotype them, and we're just generally bad people, so that gives them the right to go out and write viruses. And also, I hear the favorite one I like is, you just don't understand. You know, we know something you don't. We know about computer programs, and we're going to write viruses, and we're going to show you because you just don't understand, which is kind of funny. I mean, the people that make the right software generally commercially, generally pretty competent to write computer programs, and I think that any of us, I know I could certainly write a computer virus if I was so inclined, and I kind of understand how to write them, so that you don't understand argument, I don't really understand. Now, that was justification, and let me say that those are the reasons people have given me. I'm not saying that the justifications are wrong, really, or that they're right, but those are the reasons people give me. So what I'm telling you is what people have told me. It's not like, oh, I'm standing up here saying, you know, this is why. This is what they've told me. They could have all not told the truth, but I think they've told the truth. Many people write viruses because they are simply curious. I mean, has anybody here ever written a virus because you're curious? I don't want to know. I can understand that. I mean, I was curious. Political expression. We see viruses that say things like Macedonia or Beijing, or you know, I've seen certain other viruses that say certain things of a political nature in various situations. So people sometimes write viruses to feel empowered. People write viruses because of love. I think there's one virus documented in the paper where it actually says, I love you, and I forget, Ivana maybe was the name. So people can write a computer virus to express a love or admiration. A long time ago I had some virus engine dedicated to me. And I think people, there are all kind of ways that people express themselves, and this is one of the reasons. People do viruses to designate turf. In the very early days, Nuke liked to designate turf, and they put Nuke was here, you know, Nuke is the most powerful, you know, we're the best. And then you have, you know, Falcon Schism, you know, we rock your world, we're number one. Now, then you have Vlad will dominate the world. So, I mean, they're sort of like little turf things. Group identification. I think that in general, you know, young people, and here we're talking about younger people, there are older people, and we'll get to those, but in general, people like to be identified with groups. It's the way you get a social identity. You know, a long time ago, people got their identity primarily from families and those sorts of interactions, but society has really changed. We don't have extended families. Young people spend more time in groups and with peers, and that's very important. And Just like when we go to DEF CON, there'll be people that I hang out with that I've known a long time. It's no different than a group of people who write viruses have this thing in common and they hang out together. And some people do it because they like being identified. I've recently spoken with a young woman. Now, the gender issue, I'll touch on briefly. Most of virus writers are male. There are some females. I've documented 4 females. This little girl will be the 5th. She writes viruses and hangs out with virus writers because it makes her feel like she's part of something. So I think that just like we see, young people get involved in whatever because of identification aspects, and this is another one. Some people have written viruses because of provocation by other people. And to me, this is really unfortunate, and I don't really understand why people do it, but some people like to go out on the internet and say, you virus writers, you're all bad. You suck. You couldn't write a virus if your life depended on it. In fact, you couldn't write a virus that did X, Y, Z. And I just bet you, just a low-life scum, you couldn't write a virus that did that if your life depended on it. Now, what's the first thing that you think somebody will do? If I said, you can't pick up that pencil. Boy, you're a real idiot. There's no way you can pick up that pencil. And I just kept, you look like maybe I don't want to do that. But if I just kept going, bitch, you can pick the pencil up and you're going to toss it. So, I think it's while not justified that somebody would respond this way, it's very unfortunate that in some cases viruses have been written by provocation from external sources. Sometimes viruses are written, this is more commonly discussed now, as an issue of open source. People say, some of the software developers aren't responding as fast as we would like, so we're going to write a virus and prove our point. And probably some of you can think of some instances when that might have happened in the past several years. Some people are writing viruses because they believe that this dependency we have on technology is bad. If you look through the paper and the proceedings, I talk a little bit about this very interesting guy I've been having dialogue with, who says that we're totally too dependent on computers, and only if people start to see where the weak links are and how frail this technology really is, will we start investing more in humans and not putting so much into the technology and using it for things it was never designed to do. I think it's very interesting philosophically, and it's certainly beyond the scope of this presentation, but if anybody would like to discuss that with me, that's something that I think is really interesting. And I see more than just this guy, I see more than just a few young people talking about this particular reason for making viruses. So, if I were to say who writes viruses, you would say, well, we all know it's evil, unethical, maladjusted teenagers with no social life, no parents, are listening to too many Danzig CDs. I don't know why I got Danzig in my mind this week. Too many, insert your group here, CDs, right? We all know it. We read it all the time in the newspaper. Everybody knows that's true, but not true. Wrong. That is really not the person who's out there writing most computer viruses. Most computer virus writers that I've met certainly aren't evil people. They have normal social lives. They get along very well with their friends. They have normal relationship with their parents. Most of them have girlfriends. I've had some visit me with their girlfriends. Really delightful people. Trust them in my house, gave them the keys to my car. Don't have a problem with it. So all these preconceived stereotypes and preconceived ideas really just kind of don't make it. And the reason we know they don't make it is we did some research over a several-year period and talked to about maybe 80, maybe 100. Well, it's ongoing now, so it's going up way over that. People who write viruses. And from that, I've done some little profiles of what I call active inhabitants of the virus world or virus underground. And so we'll talk about these specifically. These are people who have actually created viruses which have been released into the wild, the things that we'll look at are the age, gender, race, employment, family, and their ethical development. The first case, I had a 16-year-old male subject who was a full-time student from Canada, one of 3 kids, and I've talked with his sister, so, this data is self-report. I should talk about this a little bit. This is self-report, what people told me, but it's not just, some virus writer sent me email, and I'm so stupid, I believed them, and now I'm publishing it. I went to meet with a lot of these people. I talked with their parents. I talked with them. I talked with their teachers. I talked with their friends. I talked with their girlfriends. I spent a lot of time with a lot of these people, so it's not just, I believed what I heard in email. we actually verified this information. I mean, I didn't say, give me your driver's license, except in the case of the kid I loaned my car to, but, that I had to see his driver's license. And he called his mother from my house, so I've got his phone number. I've got him now. So this is what we see in this first case. Now, this sounds just like about anybody, right? Talk to another little bit older fellow, 18 years old, American, full-time student, good relationship, ethical development within norms. I mean, something's not looking like maladjusted antisocial evil person here. I talked with an adult. Now, in the adult case, it's very interesting to know that while he was just like a lot of other adults, like most people here, his ethical development was not within norms at all. Now, what do I mean ethical development? These people all agreed to take certain tests that measured cognitive reasoning ability, which the tests, I can supply you with the tests if you want to see what they were, pretty standard stuff. And this fella, he wasn't up there where he should be in his ethical development. He was still down there with the child. So, and I found that consistently with the adults who remained in this culture after they were like really, really grown up and they were still, doing this kind of stuff. They had some bits of social problems. The ex-virus writers, the people who quit, basically told me that they didn't have any time, they were bored with it, they realized the impact of the action, they were from just about anywhere around the world. So as you can see, the generic virus writer, which was representative of the population, people we just looked at, could be just about anybody. They write the majority of the viruses that are out there spreading in the wild. By that we mean viruses which we have something called the Wildlist organization in the antivirus industry. It has a website, it's not in the proceedings, but it's www.wildlist.org. And there's a list of the viruses that throughout the world people report to us what are spreading in the wild. Most of the virus writers, like people that we've just been talking about, write the majority of viruses that are currently out there in the wild. Most of these viruses are going to be handled by good antivirus software. And I'm not here to sell any software, but you can ask me later which one I use if you like. We find that exposure to technology in developing countries tends to bring new people into virus writing culture. They get internet, they get online, they start looking up hacker, virus, they type it in, and then it goes to viri websites, and pretty soon you've got people in Indonesia and wherever talking with people who write viruses, and then it becomes sort of more of a multicultural thing. They get media attention where they're called, the heroes, the graffiti artists of the new millennium, so then of course people want to be there in the magazine. We find that education basically will age these people out of the behaviors and they'll move on. But they're not the only people who are writing viruses. And so we should look at these other people a little bit. Earlier on, early slide, I talked about the underground, and I put that in quotes. And the reason I put it in quotes is because it's not real. It's a legacy term. There really isn't a virus underground. It's really kind of above ground and available to anybody. And there are a number of passive inhabitants of this world that we're going to look at. First would be corporate security managers. They will be the people here who raised their hands and said, yes, I admit I've gone to these places and I've looked at viruses and maybe I've even gotten some. They believe that the information helps them do their job, helps keep them informed about what's going on in the virus development, maybe even helps them, in some cases, fight computer virus problems within their organization. I know we're doing a series of interviews on people's opinions on virus source code being published on internet, and I have one developer who said, when this last Remote Explorer worm Explorer Zip worm came out, I couldn't stop it. I got the source code off the internet, and I was able to make a solution within my company that stopped the thing from spreading. To me, this sort of thing's really important. Now, I'm not here to say I fully agree with that. I fully disagree with that. Saturday at DEF CON, we have a panel. On the panel, we have Al Flun from BugTrack. We have Attitude Adjuster. We have Dr. Richard Ford, who used to edit Virus Bulletin. We have Toril Dura from Network Associates, and maybe a few other people on a panel to discuss whether or not having virus source code on these lists actually helps managers or not. If you're a security manager here and you have a strong opinion on whether it helps you, please come and talk to me. Let me know what your opinion is about publication of this code. But we do hear a lot that people think the information helps us. We have journalists who visit the sites and think they need to inform the public. I think one thing that needs to be considered here is the responsibility of the media when reporting viruses. to understand that sometimes the information presented in the journals, the magazines, may not be technically accurate. It could result in frightening people unnecessarily. So just need to exercise some caution there. In the case of the corporate managers, too, the other thing, I think I talked earlier about doing tests on those viruses, not a good idea. The other people are the intelligence community. I imagine there's some of you sitting out there. I don't know who you are because you're in stealth mode, but I talk to people who say they go to the virus sites and they've learned something, this thing, but what they've learned is it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So I think there's too much trust in what people see with their eyes. And assorted bad guys, and in particular, certain sorts of bad guys that we're interested in here. These are not the majority of this turquoise thing. I couldn't figure out how to change the color. I wanted to make the blue thing red, but I don't use this too often. The majority of people that we've been talking about, the adolescent, the corporate, the college-age person, they're writing viruses and they're never going to affect your system. They're going to put viruses up for distribution or publication up on the World Wide Web. They're going to exchange them amongst themselves, and it's not very likely you're going to be impacted by those. There are like, 40-something thousand viruses in existence today, and maybe 300 that are actually impacting users. And I think in the paper years ago there were 3,000 viruses and maybe 150 impacting users. So the amount of the viruses that are actually affecting the user community in your organization, it's not really growing all that fast. And all these new kids coming in writing viruses, it's a potential problem, but it's not having this really big impact on you as users. The people that you're concerned about are people that write viruses over and over, get worse and worse, and eventually do some sort of harm to users or release a virus, and they happen to write one that's particularly well spreading. Are the people that actually target victims. Good antivirus software is going to handle most of the viruses, but in the case of a targeted attack, there's not really too much out there that's going to keep you safe from that sort of problem. And these are instances when profiling might actually help. Now, if profiling is going to help, and because people always say, you profile virus writers, you're the profiler, we should talk about when might profiling actually help. Remember earlier we talked about deductive profiling that's created from a single incident. If these attacks are targeted, we're looking at your exact incident, so that there may be something there that we can use. Viruses have subtle nuances. For instance, I talked earlier, I think about the nomenclatura virus, which is constructed in a very specific way. It was constructed in the same way as the Commander Bomber virus. They're both written by the same author. Now, there are a lot of other little nuances and things that we had to do to know that person who did this, and it would not be appropriate to go into all of the details, and some of it's still research in progress anyway. But it may be useful to do profiling on specific or targeted attacks. There can be characteristics about somebody who does a specific thing that you may be able to do from the behavior of the scene, or how the virus was distributed, or how the attack came about. And again, this sort of deductive profiling makes use of computer forensics, crime scene, victimology, discussions with the victim. For that reason, it's really, really important that you don't mess up any evidence. And somebody later this week, I think, is talking about not destroying evidence. That's a really important thing. So you'll probably hear a lot of that this week. Again, this isn't a quick fix. It's really exhausting, and not a lot of people probably could do it, because you have to know about people, about psychology, about sociology, about epidemiology, about computer viruses at a technical level, how the internet works. You need to know all these things and be able to, after you've learned all these things, still have the strength and time left to put in the time to do this sort of profiling. But it's certainly an interesting thing to consider. There are some dangers, however, in doing this kind of investigations, or thinking, now we know how to profile virus writers, we're going to look at individual instances. And these dangers are something that I think it's important to be aware of. The first, this fellow here, and he said that I could talk about him, so I will. Recently there was a virus that got a lot of attention. It was posted from his account. As soon as the virus was posted, I started seeing email messages flying. We know who did it. It's this guy at this place. Well, this guy didn't have a clue what was going on. I talked to this guy a lot in email. He didn't know what was going on. But yet, this sort of evidence was presented initially as a real thing. This can lead to all sorts of witch hunts and things that are bad. In the area of embedded evidence, recently things like the GUIDs are having names listed within documents, or different sort of text have been received a lot of publicity as ways in which I can identify you because your file and path was found within the document. You know, it's trivial to modify this kind of stuff. It's very easy to make it look like somebody did something they didn't do. And so if the people aren't really well informed about how this can happen, you can come up with all this evidence, and, you know, again, you're pointing a finger at the wrong person. Or you're pointing a finger at the right person, but because your evidence is so, you know, trapped up and easily modified, somebody can discredit that really easily. You know, the comparison would be like, it came from this address. I know because I saw it when I used Netstat, or I looked at my log, and here's where it came from. We all probably know, most surely, that you can make anything look like anything, and it's the same with much of this virus stuff as it is, you know, in general security world. So what's in the future? Well, first of all, it's not only the underground, not only the virus writers playing around in the computer underground, it's really everybody. It's kids at college, it's kids at grade school, it's kids in your organization, it's university professors who mail me and say, I want to assign virus writing as a class project. Can you please help me and tell me how to do it? And it's really frightening when I think of universities who are letting viruses just get written for fun, and they don't know how to contain them. They don't have a secure lab, and the students have come saying, we want to write a virus for our class project. Can we do it here on the university network? And I said, well, sure, you can do that. And then we're getting a letter saying, you know, we've got a virus running wild in our university. We don't really know how that happened. So there are lots of people playing in this space. Viruses will continue to be a problem. Most of them can be managed quite readily by antivirus software. Kids out there writing viruses and talking about them, putting them up, really aren't, you know, some big, horrible, you know, evil group of people doing horrible things. They're just doing something that they'll eventually stop, usually. We're going to see more exploration of different platforms. We haven't seen a lot of Unix viruses out there, but we'll certainly see those. We'll see Office 2000 viruses. We will see viruses using VBS, Win32 viruses, viruses making use of ActiveX controls, that sort of thing. We'll see discoveries, and I say I've already known things because I have never yet had somebody who's written a virus, and I talk with a lot of virus writers. I've never yet had somebody bring to me some not technique, but some morsel that wasn't something that people who've been doing security or working in viruses a long time didn't already know. So there's a lot of rediscovery of things that we already know, but the young people discover them over and over. Case in point, recently someone emailed me. It's the author of the Caligula virus that grabs the PGP keys and FTPs them somewhere. And he said, you know, I've discovered this neat thing. My virus can send PGP keys. It uses FTP. You know, it's like, okay, well, we know about doing this sort of thing. We've known about this for a long time. It's like, well, okay, but this is going to really change the face of how people deal with PGP in the future now that they know there's this big vulnerability with FTP. It's like, well, that isn't really a problem. Yes, but it can steal the PGP keys. It's like, yes, there were 3 years ago at DEF CON, I talked about some program, a Trojanized program that took your PGP keys and passphrase. So, you know, you can did them one better. This isn't a new thing. People will continue to discover, and as they discover, these threats will be out there, and the antivirus software will take care of most of them. And there's better software all the time that takes care of these things much more quickly. We'll see a lot of more viruses taking advantage of network connectivity. I think obviously as more and more people come on internet and have access, you know, the viruses are going to start moving around. We see the two cultures, hacking, virus writing, sort of merging a bit. So people are going to learn more about connectivity and how things work, and it will, you know, not be all done with MAPI. We'll be done with some real stuff. We're going to see payloads, and I used Dynamite because I had to make this without having my Corel CD, so Dynamite's in the clip art they give you with Office there. We're going to see payloads that do really bad things. The Explore Zip that was recently emailed a lot, and I think it's still circulating. You know, it's searched throughout network drives to find all of your data, your documents, your assembly files, your .c files, your .h files, your .out files, whatever. Just search through for everything. And there's an interest in doing bad things to people. People still do bad things to people, and viruses will certainly be continuing to grow and take advantage of that sorts of things. So what sort of solutions do we have? Because we have a kind of a very odd picture where the most people that people think of as causing the problem aren't really causing the problem. You've got people who want to do profiling because they know all these virus writers have these characteristics, so this guy must be one because he wears black and he listens to not Danzig but whoever. And so you've got just a whole bunch of confusion, but the real problem is directed threats, directed attacks, targeted attacks, and serial virus writing. It goes on and on and on. Maybe profiling for people who do these sort of acts when they're criminal would be a place to go. We're just doing really preliminary research in this, so I don't know what kind of application it will have. I'm generally pretty skeptical about this kind of thing. I also think it's really important to remember that virus writing is not a crime, and I don't think you should treat people like criminals when they haven't done a crime and go, tracking people down and finding out all their data because they did something that you don't like. It doesn't seem right to me. Don't like it. Education is really the one way that we can most impact the casual virus writer, the young person who may not realize the impact of their actions. Many people I talk to say, well, I just didn't realize that when the virus got out there, it would really hurt a human being. I thought it was just like something cool to do. But, man, I talked to this guy, and it deleted his information, or it acted in a way I didn't anticipate, because sometimes people don't mean to be doing something malicious or harmful, but they don't anticipate how that program may react in another environment, so they end up causing unintended damage, having problem. If people become more aware that once the virus spreads, once it's out of their control, they can't tell what will happen to it, and they don't know how it may react in somebody else's environment. And you need to educate your InfoSec managers as well that getting viruses off the internet and playing with them could be dangerous for your organization in terms of liability. If you end up sending out some infected documents to somebody, or you send out a document that says, "Hi, regard our recent meeting, blah 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 blah, you idiot," because the virus inserts the word "you idiot" within the document, or something nastier, which some viruses have been known to do. There are technical solutions. In our research group, we worked on this immune system model, which has a pretty good result for having. I tested it with macroviruses because they're the biggest threat. With the technology, all the previously unknown to the immune system technology, macroviruses that I fed had about a 3-minute turnaround for getting the virus in, replicating the virus, creating a cure, and redistributing the cure. So certainly solutions that are modeled on this instantaneous approach will be very interesting and the thing to watch for. And profiling, if it would work, certainly we'd have to use a deductive model, in my opinion. I think some people here are speaking about profiling tomorrow. They may think differently. I think it would work best because there would be information about assessing the actual code. We have certainly the ability to talk to the victims about how the virus spread within their organization, how they were first exposed to it, and that's really important, and looking for certain signature behaviors. Now, I've probably talked really fast. I don't wear a watch, so I don't know what's going on here. But this is how you can get a hold of me. The first address is if you want to talk to me about truly research stuff and you're really interested in my work. The second is if you're truly paranoid and feel the need to use one of these NCSC mail sites. And I do not work for NCSC mail. They very kindly allow me to have this email address because my email changes so much. I'm a consultant with IBM, so I really don't know where mail goes for how long or whatever. And I have a personal address you can mail me, which isn't on there, and it's sgordon@format.com. And I've registered that a long time ago, and it is not for sale, so don't even ask. And I guess that's all, and if somebody has questions, I'll be happy to try and answer, and if I don't know the answer, I will take your question down, and I will find somebody who can answer it if it can be answered, and I'll get back with you. Okay.
Based on the profiles you showed, do you see any efforts by foreign governments or professional people trying to do virus?
Your question is based on what I've seen. Am I aware of any efforts by foreign governments or professional virus writers? I've certainly talked with young people who are virus writers who have discussed with me their concerns about having been contacted and been recruited for these sorts of things. In terms of have I ever actually directly observed that, that's outside the scope of this presentation. Any other questions?
You said that virus writers completely not anybody, but the 80 people that you actually surveyed, see any kind of...
You want to know if I have seen any common denominator amongst the first 80 people in the group that I surveyed.
Just any kind of pattern.
Any sort of pattern that was emerging. Yes, they were all very intelligent. They all had good relationships with their parents and peers. They all had good social lives. They were all within ethical norms. The young people, not the adults, and they all wrote viruses. So it's not anything that has really, it's like it could be, just anybody really could be. The stereotype just doesn't work. I got interested because I kept hearing how evil these people were, but yet many people that I would meet obviously weren't evil people, but they wrote viruses, and I thought, what's up with this? So that's why I did this study. Yes? I can't hear you. You want to know if I found that the information put in has been helping to track macrovirus writers? No, I have not. Yes?
Currently also talking to the Explore Zip writer had a thing against Microsoft. Y'all found any more on that? That was 2 or 3 weeks ago that I read that.
Your question is, have I found anything about the Explorer Zip being linked with Microsoft? That the writer had? I've not done any work on that actual incident other than to just observe what the virus itself did, so I don't really know. I mean, it would take certainly a lot of study and a lot of time to go through all that. I think it's really easy to say something based on how it looks, but again, that's why I have the don't try this at home kids, because you can say, oh, it had that in the document. I had one fellow say, I put the virus in Notepad and it had this text string in it, so I know who wrote it. And please don't try this stuff at home with Notepad looking at viruses, because it probably won't. Well, it may. I mean, he may be right, but it doesn't seem too solid to me. Yes?
With the advent of very distributed applications, do you see the definitions of viruses changing over time?
I think viruses, the technical definition of viruses, as done by Fred Cohen, and I think viruses in general will always be self-replicating programs. But what you think of as viruses has already been changing. In our work with the Wild List, people mail me and say, oh, I got this program that did X, Y, Z, can you help with this terrible virus? What we've had to do is say, we're now going to note anything that is reported as spreading, whether that spread is by natural replication mechanism or the spread that you clicked and sent it to a bunch of other people, and your mail system is what sent it. It's not traditional replication as the file executes and makes copies of itself, but it takes these actions. So I don't think the technical definition will change, but the user definition is already evolving. Anybody else have question? Very back row. That's you.
Sorry, you say practical applications for a virus? Like any uses for this technology?
Do you?
You know that?
Oh, well, no, I don't. But if you do, I'd like to know about them. I've read lots of papers. KOH, users had a lot of problems with things that were encrypted by KOH. They ended up having a lot of corruption. I've never seen anything done by a program that's viral that wasn't done better and with more stability by a program that wasn't viral. The viral aspect of the program tends to add instability because the virus author is often not familiar with how the program may react in other environments. So that may be true of other software as well, but I found that to be particularly the case with viruses, and particularly in the case of KOH, a number of people expressed concern that it didn't actually behave as they would have liked.
Can I continue that? What about distributed agent technology and self-replicating network that is actually present for a purpose
Right. At the beginning of the talk, when I said that the program or the presentation was about self-replicating programs that cause problems, I said this presentation wasn't going to deal with autonomous agents and things that do like you're talking about. I don't really know. I've done a little bit of research, and one of our groups works with this autonomous agent technology. I'm not really certain that these are really viral, as in self-replicating the same way, but I don't really know. It's not the area I work in, but if you're interested in it and you'd like to talk about it, I'd love to talk about it with you. And very back row, very you that, yeah, turning you. Vandal, as far as I know, is a marketing term derived by a company for programs that do malicious thing. There's not really, within the antivirus community, I've never seen anybody refer to a type of program as a vandal. I think that's a label. There's a software that says it's anti-vandal, but I don't really see that term in very wide use. Maybe you're talking about hostile ActiveX controls, or Java, problems with Java. We've done some research on that, actually, and it's on the website, which is listed here, about what problems people are actually seeing as far as these hostile code problems, Java, ActiveX. What we found was, in hundreds of thousands of people that we surveyed, while people were having experiences with Trojans on certain ISPs, there weren't really any incidents of users in the real world suffering impact from hostile, that sort of hostile code. We're seeing more come in from time to time. There are vulnerabilities in browsers and exploits, but as far as, that particular type thing, no.
Education for IS managers. What about policy? I know that when we were looking at writing policy for our agency, we were looking for examples in the real world that would kind of echo best practices for virus protection, and we didn't find any.
Your question is, what role does policy play in educating information security professionals? I think policy is really important, but it's only important if it's documented and if you follow it. It doesn't do any good when it's just written down the paper and you don't even read it, or if it's written on the paper and you read it but you don't really do those things. We have some guidelines for policy up on the IBM AV site. They're very generic, not structured, for a specific product. Christine Orcheski, I think she does some work now with Pentagon, has done a very excellent article on policy, which you can find there on the website. And if you can't find it because it's archived, if you send me an email, I'll find it for you. Or maybe you'd like to talk with her. She does really, really solid work in policy development. You're welcome. Yes?
In your research, you have percentages of where viruses come from, the majority of the viruses, or have you broken it down? You see where they come from within, or from the internet, or other media?
Your question is, in the research, have we been able to find where the viruses come from? Do you mean countries or epidemiologically?
Just within the enterprise.
Within the enterprise. No, I haven't broken it down. We've done epidemiological studies within IBM research on how viruses actually spread. But, and you can look on the website. It just shows that they come in, the macroviruses are coming in primarily through Word documents, of course, and they're the most spreading virus, the macroviruses, but nothing else really. And the research we just did on the Trojans, though, we found that some people are actually getting them off Usenet and decoding them and then ending up, then executing them. And I think only one person out of a couple 100,000 actually had a virus come in, a boot sector virus on a floppy disk. Do you guys still bring in floppy disks? Do you guys still have them? So raise your hand if you use floppy disks in your organization to... Oh, that's really interesting, because a lot of my colleagues say boot sector viruses are going to die out because nobody ever brings in floppy, so I can tell them they're wrong now. And thank you. Any other questions? Very bad. Oh, I'm sorry. Just a second. Questions about counterintelligence and different use for viruses. I didn't say there wasn't any use. I said I wasn't discussing them within this presentation. And I said I hadn't really thought a lot about agent technologies and the sorts of things that he was talking about. You're talking about use of viruses for targeted attacks. Right, practical application. And I think that when I'm talking about deductive profiling, that would be the place where it would be the most applied at a directed, targeted attack. Certainly, anything that a computer program can do, a computer virus can do. So there's certainly that possibility. But there are many easier ways to do things than to write a virus and spread it to try and do those things. And, if somebody would decide to use a virus to do these things, that's possible, they may. I don't know if I'd call that a good application, though. Time, one more question and then I'm supposed to stop.
A lot of times viruses aren't used. You don't know it's coming from a foreign country. It comes from the direction. truly still up, it can't be attacked in no foreign country. What I'm trying to say, the comment, you are going to attack every foreign country, military, commercial, and
But I think discussions of viruses from military applications and things like that are probably done in different environments than this one. Okay, thank you all very much.